if you look at it from a Solana perspective, it's likely that if there were to be an next ETF, it's probably Sol.
Did you guys hear about a potential replacement for Gensler, though, if that does go through? Dan Gallagher?
Yes, meme coins is the future. That's the way. But what is the future? Us is hippopotamus and memes. But by definition, meme coins promise you nothing, right? So
So I think this might be a new era of crypto, and I am very, very excited about it.
Welcome to Salt Brothers with myself, Simon, and my good friend Eno, where it is our job to throw you into the Solana rabbit hole and show you around our exciting ecosystem.
Our mission is to help you keep on top of the latest and greatest in the Solana ecosystem so that you never run out of fun things to talk about with your friends and your crypto homies. Hey, Simon, how are you? We have a guest today.
I'm good, Eno. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm excited. We have Daniel in the room. How are you, Daniel?
hey guys, absolute pleasure being here.
Good to have you.
Daniel, you want to tell us a little bit like what you're working on?
Sure, absolutely. So the reason I'm here today is because Simon and I have been working together on something rather exciting for the last couple of months, in fact. I come from SwissBorg originally, which is one of the biggest exchanges in Europe, over 2 billion assets under management, 1 million KYC users. About us is we do things a bit differently. So we only exchange really that doesn't have its own order book. We aggregate liquidity from originally other sectors like Binance, but also now DEXs. So we are actually more of a MEX, like a meta exchange than just a SEX. And much of our philosophy is bringing users in a very UX friendly way back on chain and bring activity and value accrual back on chain as well. So with that in mind, we've launched very recently a new project called BorgPad, which is going to be SwissBorg's way of launching products and ideas to get users back in early on. And as I said, the whole primary market that's been privatized over the last, well, since the ICO era, really, bring it back on chain, make token launches healthy again, make them fun again for users, and allow people to grow their pie, and not just be dumped on by institutionals and private investors, as it has been for the last couple of years.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Daniel. We're going to get started with our first segment of the podcast, which is kind of like market conditions, Solana, general trends that's going on. I mean, Trump just got elected and the markets are absolutely pumping,
Booming.
right? Bitcoin has
Yep.
reached 80K. Simon, you want to do your normal market breakdown?
I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Like a new Bitcoin all-time high just came in yesterday, which is pretty insane. It's really like it's crazy times, I would say. So yeah, after the 5th of November, after the elections, we saw a good first impulse in Bitcoin and also in the other major tokens. And then it's pulling through. Like we're not at the price top yet. Chart looks really healthy. Looking at the Solana chart right now, and we might be in a new leg up in the Solana chart as well, where we can reach new all-time highs beyond 260 very soon.
Yeah,
So
it
yeah,
seems like October was delayed by a month. So
yeah. I mean, for reasons, right? With the
yeah,
election going on, people were just afraid of trading before that. I think everyone was waiting for the signal, and then
the previous all-time high for Solana was $250. I'm actually
mm,
quite surprised at the pump. My prevailing theory at the time was that the market had already kind of priced in a Trump win. And the
mm,
reason why I believe that is because the prediction markets, we're predicting a 65% win
mm,
probability for Trump, which was really off from the polls, right? The polls were
mm-hmm,
suggesting that he had anywhere between like a 52 or a 55% win probability. I did not expect there to be like a 13% gap between the prediction markets and the polls. But
mm,
obviously, it seems that this is just another case of the prediction markets being more accurate than the polling,
yeah.
especially since he won by such a wide margin. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also quite surprised that it seems like he won the popular vote as well. Daniel, were you keeping track of the US election at all?
Yeah, of course. I think hard to miss it, right? If you scrolled on Twitter for last week, it's very hard to miss it. Again, I think it's the beginning of the boat. Like some people call it super cycle, whatever you want to call it, but essentially this Trump presidency, think about it, it's a 4-year option call on the crypto markets. You get Gensler out, the US takes back a sort of sandbox approach to crypto. He announced a Bitcoin strategic reserve. All this like creates a really cool environment where the idea of this super cycle could literally unfold, and at least it's a very good catalyst for next at least 6 to 12 months. So yeah, I think it's just the beginning of the next leg up. Obviously, very very excited about it. But yeah, uh, if you look at it from a Solana perspective, it's likely that if there were to be an next ETF, it's probably Sol. I'm not sure what that puts into pricing, but obviously, it'll be very interesting to see how all of this unfolds.
Yeah. I was doing my homework recently, and something that very much surprised me is that, the SEC is an independent federal agency, very similar to the Fed. And so what that means is like after a chair has been appointed, they actually can't be forced to leave office. They are allowed to continue their term. And in Gary's case, it would be until 2026. So if Trump did want to get rid of Gensler, he actually has to find some sort of justification or cause that would be accepted by, I don't know, the courts to see whether or not we could boot Gensler. That was a bit of a surprise to me. I had always kind of assumed that the SEC chair was a position that the president could hire or fire at will at their pleasure. But apparently, similar to the chair of the Fed, yeah, it's a position that where, in order to keep distance between the White House and kind of political considerations versus kind of like regulations and policy, he's allowed to continue his term until 2026 unless Trump finds just cause. So that was, I think, very contrary to the narrative that I've been seeing online on Twitter. Do you guys have any initial reactions?
I wasn't aware much, actually. I think most people are not aware of that. Most people
Yeah.
think, okay, Gensler is gone now, like it's over, like for sure. I think that was the initial reaction of Twitter as well, and of the markets as well. We've seen a couple of tokens pumping that are directly correlated with SEC actions. So they would have had problems if Gensler stays there. And those tokens performed quite well as well. So I think markets priced it in that he's gone. Let's see what happens
It could be
eventually.
possible that people just believe that Trump is going to use whatever authority he has to find just cause. And so like that's completely reasonable. We'll see how Trump wields his power at the White House to get rid of Gensler or not.
As much as I agree on the logic with Simon, but I definitely don't think the market's priced in what just happened. If you consider the next 4 years unfold, the whole regulatory laid back, retail comes back in, sees crypto as a more holistic, healthy investment option. Quantitative easing across all central banks over the next couple of years. The debt rollover of this year is ridiculous because we're repaying the 4 year options on the COVID debt. And it's crazy. If you then think of a strategic reserve in the US, there's no way that this, it's definitely not priced in. This thing is going higher, much, much higher, independently of Gensler.
Did you guys hear about a potential replacement for Gensler though, if that does go through? Dan Gallagher?
No,
I have
Yeah,
not heard. No. What about him?
I
Dan
like his
Gallagher.
name though.
Yeah, no, you should like his
Good
name
first
because
name.
Dan Gallagher is the chief legal officer at Robinhood. And he also was a former commissioner at the SEC. So currently, kind of how that executive structure works is that you have a chair, and underneath the chair are four commissioners that help execute the will of the chair. So not only does Dan Gallagher have previous experience working at the highest levels of the SEC, but he works at Robinhood. So I think that's absolutely amazing. I do hope that goes through. I hope we see an opening of U.S. interest in DeFi. I hope that folks can incorporate their companies in the U.S. without threat of what was called regulation by enforcement. So I think this might be a new era of crypto, and I am very excited about it.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think so too. The only thing we need now is to see that Trump is actually putting through with promises and everything, because usually there's a lot of talk pre-campaign and then not so much action post-campaign. But I think we're going to see that next year.
Yes, that is true. There is a huge divide between campaign promises and stuff that presidents actually work on. So we shall see. But as long as he appoints the right person to the SEC, I think that's a huge win for the industry in general. And next up, we're going to be talking about new product launches and developments on Solana. I think the first thing that we want to talk about, obviously, is what BorgPad, again, a kind of, I wouldn't say like a sister company, but a company of SwissBorg. I know that you guys work on multiple products. And the collaboration that you have with Solid, the token launch for Solana ID.
Maybe, Daniel, before we do that, let's just talk about Solana launchpads for like 30 seconds, because there is not so much going on Solana. Like when we were looking into launching our own token, we had to do a lot of research and we're like, what's the popular launchpad on Solana? And then that was directly when LFG started the first time. And that was the only option we really had back then to apply for LFG. And I think we should have a few options on Solana that also differ a little bit in their approach to doing public sales. So that's also why I'm super excited that we now have a new pad on the block, which is a Solana focused launch pad, but built by a company that has been around for a long time and already had some learnings, right, Daniel? I think you guys, that's kind of the one of the advantages you bring to the table as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously there's a lot of launch pads on EVM, but even they, most of them are, respectfully said, they're not particularly good. There's a big issue with launch pads generally speaking, in the sense that most launch pads operate with a very low degree of conviction. If you look at things like bull perks and competitors, essentially what most of these give you, unless you're a blockbuster project, which in which case you probably wouldn't go for a launch pad of these because you would have backing from huge VCs, which also actually is a consequence of Gary, and happy to talk about that. I mean, BorgPad in itself is our existence is a direct consequence of the SEC's actions. So it's actually a very good transition, but we can get into that in a second. But essentially, what many of these launchpads force you to do is, as a new project, you agree on a deal. You have to first pay rather stupid fees to them, and contingencies. They have benchmarks that are completely idiotic and just tell you where the space is at. We've worked with launchpads that were telling us, just to for ourselves look at the competition. Oh, you need at least X thousand followers on Twitter, like 50,000 followers on Twitter. So what do 9 out of 10 projects do? They go to a bot farm, spend $500 and have 50,000 followers on Twitter. That's just one silly example, but the amount of that kind of rules as part of the due diligence was insane. So the point is, it's really quite gloomy out there. And in fact, if you invest with one of these projects, launchpads, most of them have a payback clause. Whereas if your product doesn't do a certain performance within 2-3 weeks after the launch, you are legally obliged to repay the investors, the investments. So imagine that as a early investment. The whole structure of capital allocation, capital formation breaks down at that level. If you invest with a payback guarantee, you do not invest. The assumption of asymmetric return only exists because you take asymmetric risks. You cannot expect to get any sort of return if you don't take any risk involved. So really the corruption level behind everything we see right now, whether it's at the launchpad level, or then even at the distribution level, which is the sexes, it's really, really bad. And that's where BorgPad comes from. And then, as you say, yeah, LFG is obviously a good alternative that we don't bash at all. I think what Jupiter is doing in all senses makes a lot of sense. Though, they've had issues, they're now rebuilding it for version 2, whatever they're calling it. But either way, there needs to be pluralism in the space. We can't just rely on LFG, which has limited bandwidth. And how we do things differs quite a lot from LFG, and the convictions we come with are quite different. So, yeah, happy to go into it, but that's a quick little lay of the land, and what happens in the launchpad space at the moment on Solana and across.
I actually have a question. I've also heard of different schemes where sexes will demand a portion of the tokens, and if it doesn't generate, like, let's say the expected amount of like new users to the exchange, measured by metrics that I don't quite know, you actually forfeit a portion of those tokens or have to pay
Yeah,
additional fees. Is that true? Like, I'm not quite so sure how that works.
absolutely. Yeah, it's honestly, it's ridiculous, to be completely frank with you guys. To give you the perspective of how this has come about, and that's how we come back to Gary and the SEC is, in 2017, you had the ICO mania craze, and that's actually where SwissBorg come from. We were at the time the largest ICO. We raised 52 million bucks, and one of the only probably like 10 more other companies are still alive, and then 99.9% died or scammed, robbed, whatever. But the point is, we came from that era. Obviously there was a lot of scams, so that then attracted the eyes of the regulators, and they essentially regulated it to death. So it's rather impossible to do an ICO today, in traditionally speaking. So what happened then is that we fell back into the TradFi model, where the primary market, so before a token gets distributed through an exchange, so you need to buy directly from the company, that got privatized again into institutional and private investors. So instead of having retail aping in at the initial very low valuations, and even you had like a bonding curve that could determine the price, you essentially gave all of that value creation accrual back to VCs, originally, and that's perfectly fine. But then where more and more the power abusers came is that VCs started. So the way it works is that VCs 9 out of 10 times will sign you a safe plus a token warrant. So safe is just an option on future equity, and then a token warrant is tokens associated with that equity. The space until now, what we see, I've realized, is that realizing the equity is very, very hard in crypto because it takes time. And most of the companies actually never manage to create value through the equity. So the token is the way that you can exit your investment as a venture capital. And it's much more quick. It's much less regulation than on traditional markets. You don't have to IPO, et cetera, et cetera. So that then quickly derived from, okay, let's first invest into project we believe into. Let's take retail as exit liquidity. And this is where all of this corruption started to take place, because now you had very qualified and intelligent private investors like VCs and angels investing in these companies. And then obviously they had to distribute the token and find the exit liquidity. And who do you turn to? Well, exchanges. And exchanges now become the gatekeeper of exit liquidity. So what happened then is that as a founder, if Simon were in an alternate reality that he wouldn't be as cool as a dude as he is today, he would have paid off VCs, market makers, sexes, and the lot. It's like a king would do in the old days. All his servants pay them off to coerce with them, list at a stupidly high valuation, and then allow everybody else who's invested in previous rounds, who already realized 100x, 1000x in some cases, dump on retail liquidity because it was assumed until now that if you list on Binance, that's a holy grail and price goes up. So that assumption got abused to death. And actually, what we saw is that if you look at the past year, the average project that listed on Binance was at a $4 billion valuation, which is ridiculous. And 9 out of 10, literally 90% of projects net dumped on launch on Binance, and are still down 30, 40, 50, 60% year to date. So that whole model broke down, and you have very corrupted industry through that, and that's a consequence because of the initial regulation, right? And then to give you the full length of where we are here today, then you had meme coins that came out of that as a rebellion against this. But this issue with meme coins is that there's nothing positive about them. At best, they're a distraction, right? Because if you think about it, if tomorrow all that, like if you take guys like Murad, who say like, yes, meme coins is the future, that's the way. But what is the future? Us as hippopotamus and memes. But by definition, meme coins promise you nothing, right? So it's a very defeatist and nihilistic outlook on the future of the industry. So we were saying then on the BorgPad side is, well, we can do things better than sex and actually take the learnings from meme coins on how they launched with community first, low valuations, no, get rid of all these useless intermediaries, but apply that to real projects with real visions that want to drive real innovation. And so we're starting this journey. We've started already a couple months ago in summer when we did a raise with SwissBorg and Solana ID, but Solana ID is now about to launch on BorgPad. The community of Solana ID is the first and the only ones who can invest. And essentially, together with Simon, what we're doing right now is building that demand, getting the message across, spreading the gospel, and realizing that there's a new way of launching tokens. And that's what we're doing at BorgPad.
Well, so how are you guys doing it differently over at BorgPad, specifically with regards to, like, let's say your partnership with Simon?
Yeah, so what we did is we allow, first of all, it's very important, I think, one thing that's learned from ICOs and meme coins even is you need to let your community invest. So a token, because a token is not a representative of ownership of the company, despite what many companies or projects try to, with innuendos, lead you to believe, you actually don't own the company underlying the token. So the token is the community. So we need to understand is you need to let the community invest early on and win together. So what we did with Simon is we did a small round of 500K to bootstrap part of the treasury, allow Simon to build a product. And now that we are ready to launch a token, we've set it. So the way it works is going to be a fixed price token, so $20 million FTV. And one of the key differences that we do is that we understand that a TGE is not necessarily a specific date, but it's a moment in time. And it's a moment in time where you can measure demand increasingly outpacing any potential selling pressure you face. So it's very important that companies like Simon, they kept control of their supply, which is coming back to your initial question, sorry, where he hasn't given away stupid amounts of token warrants and safts to market makers, sexist, who all have these option calls. So market maker works the exact same way. Depending on the price is, they have options to rebuy your token and resell your token at a specific price, which is a heavy discount or markup, depending on if it's buy or sell. So essentially it's a loss wherever you work with these centralized guys, because they are in such an asymmetric position of power. So you take away all of these guys, recuperate 30% of your tokens, which is huge. One of the big issues with, if you go the sex way, is that you need to give away that 15 to 30% of your token to the third parties. And essentially with that, you lose control of your order flow because you no longer can control who sells your token and for what reasons. So you have no visibility on actually what's going on. So by Simon not doing that, he retains the quasi entirety of the token control. And now we can very precisely engineer when to launch a token with Simon. So it's now all about creating obviously the hype and spreading the gospel of why Solana ID is great and why people should invest in it. And once we get that enough demand, essentially then we launch. So it's a very data-driven approach, which I think is very different from what even LFG or any of the other guys would do. They would just set an arbitrary date. There's a bonding curve, off you go. We want to be much more data-driven and know why we launch. First of all, only work with projects we have a strong conviction.
Okay, so I think we established now there's a new launchpad on Solana that's now an alternative for a lot of project founders. And yeah, I think we should closely follow the first case study, which is Solana ID, to see how it works. But yeah, there's more about the whole launch, obviously, on our Twitter. But I think what I'm much more excited about is about the opportunity for more permissionless token launches that will have better performance than what we've seen in the past 12 to 24 months in the IDO space. Actually, there was a presentation yesterday that I followed. They said almost 80% of all IDOs since January 2023 are down in the red, even right now still. So after tokens pumping, is a huge percentage, right? And why should investors go in alternative tokens if Solana, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some other blue chips all outperformed them?
I actually have a question about something that I found super interesting about the explanation that you gave, Daniel, which is that you were saying that instead of thinking of TGE as a date and time, you think of it instead as a kind of like a measurement of demand, right? So assuming that certain measurements that you're paying attention to meet, let's say, the bare minimum or the base level requirements, then that's the time in which you do TGE. My only kind of like reservation about this, and I'm sure you've thought about this, is that there is utility in having let's say a launch date for a TGE because you can focus attention, whether it be through your marketing efforts or your communications, to get the most amount of retail capital for people or anybody who's interested in the product, right? To put their money in at that specific point in time. So like if you're doing it instead on like let's say certain criteria, as opposed to like having like a huge hyped announcement, probably the most obvious example of this would be like Jupiter, right? Obviously, Jupiter, if they had done it through BorgPad, would have topped the metrics for whatever it is that you measure, and so it would have been the right time to TGE. But would just love to get your thoughts about like kind of the trade-offs that you make when you TGE on a specific date versus TGEing based on a set of metrics. I definitely see the merits of the latter, but would love to get more of your thoughts.
Absolutely, yeah. There's actually a very short answer. There's actually not too different to what you're describing. It's instead of just committing blindly to a date, like 2-3 months in advance, like maybe not 3 months in advance, but like say 1 to 2 months in advance, which is most projects do. We take a bit more time to understand the momentum that the project has. So with Simon, we have a rough margin in date of when we're going to TG. So we're not like blindly saying we're going to TG maybe Q2 2025. That's absolutely not the case. The TG is going to happen relatively soon. But it's all about finding the optimal moment when to TG. So within this, let's say a couple of week period, what we do right now, we have a whitelist going, and people are already able to commit the investments, even though they're not really investments, it's like a psychological buy-in. And with that, they essentially commit a wallet as well. So we can measure behind what the wallet has done in the past, if they held tokens, if they sell them, if they dump them straight after getting them, how they interact with previous airdrops, the level of wealth. All of this comes into a very data-driven approach, and we can essentially derive from that a rather precise range of what the actual demand is from the token. And then if we see it going the right direction and at increasing speeds, that when we start narrowing down the date and be like, okay, we TG in 2 weeks or like, and then if it goes even better, we TG on a specific date. So it's much more of a progressive approach rather than just blindly picking a date on the calendar because I fancy that date or it was my mum's birthday, and much more understanding why we're picking a date, So it's really not that different, but it's just much more data driven. And the counterparty to that is that if that number is not going in the direction we want, then we know that we have a bit more work to do with Simon, and we might postpone it by a couple of weeks and just do whatever we think in terms of growth and campaign wise we need to do to actually get to that number that we need to, right? So it's just an idea of being able to postpone the TG in time until we reach that optimal number.
Oh, okay. That's actually pretty cool. I didn't realize that the variance was within like a tight range. In my head, I kind of imagined it as we'll see, but that's not the case at all. It's like we have a target range, and depending on how it's doing, like we might adjust that range accordingly.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Huh. You excited, Simon?
Definitely. I mean, it's getting closer and closer, right? So yeah, but it's the right approach, right? Because if you don't do data driven, you're basically just gambling on the demand for your token.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's really silly. You work in a space where everything is openly, you can read anything of the chain. So imagine saying, I hope my TG is going to do well. Like
Yeah.
the fallacy of that is so anti Web3 and crypto. So yeah, that's our approach. It's very simple, and I think it makes so much sense. And yeah, we're going to prove it with Solana D first, and then obviously many more to come. And as Simon said as well, the idea is one day to be able to make this permissionless and have a set of open APIs that people can use. But obviously at the beginning, it's very important to, as we create this new meta, which hopefully will become the better than sex meta in the coming era. At the beginning, it's important to have some level of curation to make sure things go well.
Yeah, absolutely. And would love to get your thoughts on this next topic. Drift just got listed on Upbit, and they appreciated in price, I think over 3x. Arthur Hayes is obviously an advisor over at Drift. Drift famously had less than $1 million in TVL at the start of 2023. Currently, they're over $1 billion, so that's absolutely incredible growth. They've been in the Solana ecosystem since pre-FTX blow up. They raised their first round in 2021. I think the perception for a lot of folks, if I'm just being frank here, is that they had accepted so much VC money by the time that they got to TGE. It seemed like a clear dump, right? But instead, what we've seen with Drift is, a bit of a sell-off in the beginning, really strong price recovery going into Breakpoint, which was new all-time highs, and now an Upbit listing. So I don't know whether it's a combination of Koreans love to degen and Trump has become president, and Arthur Hayes, bull posting about Drift. There's, I would say, just like the perfect storm of good conditions for Drift, and I wonder whether or not you've seen other tokens like this in the past, Daniel. Like tokens that maybe you thought weren't going to do so well, but then over time, just through very, very strong fundamentals, were able to, appreciate the price of the token, regardless of how much they had sold to investors.
Yeah, and Drift is certainly an interesting one. Again, I may be wrong, and I don't have actually data right now to prove that I'm right, but I very strongly believe that it has not done the price action it has because it was listed on an Upbit. Maybe that was just a droplet that Koreans still go for the, if listed on this exchange, price go up. But we've seen over the past year so many examples of the contrary. Again, 9 out of 10, in fact, where it's just simply not the case. If you look at Drift, as you said, like I think it's a perfect storm of things. It was the largest betting market on Solana. I actually, on the very last day, I bet, I won't say for who, but I bet a bunch of money on just because I didn't want to worry about going on Polymarket with and having to go on Polygon, etc. Right? So no, Drift. I think there's a lot of use cases. Their metrics, the user metrics, obviously went up the roof as well with the election. I think it's a perfect storm of that. Another really good outlier of that kind of at first sight would defy the narrative that I've been talking about for the last couple of minutes is Grass, which listed at relatively high valuation. Their pre-product really, and now what is it? 2.5, 3 billion FDV. Got 8-figure investments from Multicoin Cap, I think Delphi, and I forgot who else. But essentially, Grass, the way I see it is that it justifies even more our better than sex narrative because they can now set the benchmark of what it takes to succeed on a DEX level. And because the way the way sexes work today, listings essentially brute forcing success. It's like if you were to brute force a password into an account if you're a hacker, that's exactly the equivalent today. The only way you can brute force your success on a sex today is if you have such a high degree of backing, such a high degree of user base, and of the right people and such a high degree of funding that you can actually pay off all the sexes, you can pay off all the market makers, you can pay off all the intermediaries that need to profit from your venture and still succeed. And Grass is a really good example. As I said, I mean, they've got 2.5 million nodes operating, which is huge. They've got, as I said, eight figure investments from the best VCs in the space. And they did a really good airdrop campaign as well. And the mind share and the narrative is on point. They launched just after the AI agents met over the last couple of weeks. They are decentralizing AI, the new kid on the block. Their whole marketing was perfect. So that's what it takes to succeed on sex today. So any other founder asking themselves, is this a route for me? You can ask yourself two very simple questions. Are you Grass? Are you Drift? If the answer is yes, then by all means give it a go. But more than that, even if you are, ask yourself the then second question: could Drift have done it without the sexes and still perform the way they would have done, and in the process save themselves the tens of millions of dollars that they had to deploy to list on sexes by buying the tokens, by giving the security deposits that you mentioned earlier, all of this. So that's a double question that any founder should ask themselves. And I think in most cases you would come to the answer that probably the future is not sex.
Yeah, exactly my thoughts. I think also if we want to have a lot of startups and projects driving innovation, they need easier ways to bootstrap a token project, because the grass way was exceptional, definitely, right? As you said yourself, Daniel. Like there's only a very few companies that are at that stage that can do it in this space, and there's a lot of startups that are still great and they have good ideas. They're just not at that stage, right? So yeah, I think going forward, 2025, we're going to see a very different styles of token launches, ICOs, and a lot of things will change. Hopefully for the better. Yeah.
Simon, I'd love to get your perspective. I think the audience would love to hear what are the considerations that you as a founder are looking into as you go into TGE? Like obviously everyone who hasn't released a token by now, because of the current environment and the positivity towards the potential bull run, are all contemplating a token launch. But the thing that I think makes your situation a little different is that it's almost kind of perfectly timed because you have been preparing for this for months and months and months. And so instead of, some people who are just considering it now, I think that you've been considering it for quite a while. So what are some of the things that you look at going into TGE?
There's multiple layers to it, and it's really a kind of a full-time job as a founder to set up a successful token launch. But I think one thing we did very well was, like you said, giving a range of where the token will launch, what moment in time, but never an exact date. So the community was never in the position to blame us for not keeping the promise of a date, right? So I as a founder, I would not put yourself in this position. So we always kept the range of Q4 2024, right, this year. And then we were internally also gambling a little bit on the outcomes of the elections, which was nice cherry on top. Because I think without being political, for me as a crypto founder, it is a net positive potential.
Sure.
So yeah, picking the right moment is important. How to communicate it with the community is important. Giving that range instead of a date, keeping the anticipation high as well, and then now all the focus is on creating that interest in the company and that buying pressure for the token at the public sale. So that means what kind of marketing campaigns do you want to roll out? How do you attract more users to find and discover your company and your associated token? So you need to make a lot of those marketing decisions. And then there's technical token setup, obviously, where you need to create the smart contract on Solana to set up the token and so on. And then keeping the community that you already have engaged to participate in the roadmap, right, to the TGE. So it's a lot of topics that come at once, I would say. And that was just scratching the surface. But yeah, if all boxes are checked, I think chances are high that it is still possible to have successful token launches after what we've seen in the past couple of months.
Yeah, no, it's I feel like working on TGE sometimes feels like throwing water on a huge fire, and it's just like you have to keep spraying more and more water onto that fire to tame the entire process. But I'm sure it's an exhaustive list of things that you have to consider going into TGE. I think that this has been like an absolutely wonderful conversation about token launches. I think this will be a very useful conversation for people that are considering launching a token for their own projects. And let's wrap up today's podcast, just kind of talking about a couple of events that are coming up for Solana. One of them is in the far, far future. And it was announced a couple of months ago, but we never talked about it. Breakpoint 2025 is going to be in Abu Dhabi. Which is, we've spent some time in Abu Dhabi, haven't we, Simon?
Yeah, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, UAE as a whole. I think it's always a nice place to fly into for a crypto event. Everyone is getting together. So yeah, I'm really happy it's going to happen there. And especially Abu Dhabi is exciting, I think. Most crypto conferences I know go to Dubai. But Abu Dhabi, again, is a bit of a different feeling as well. Feels a bit more serious than the playful city of Dubai, I would say. So
Yes,
looking
yes.
forward to that.
Are you going to be going to, do you have any plans to go to Breakpoint 2025, Daniel?
I think we'll be there. There's a very high chance that we'll be there and see you guys around. Actually going to Dubai end of the month to see Anthony, the other co-founder of BorgPad, who lives there. But as Simon says, I think the amount of intellectual capital that's in the UAE with crypto is insane. I think with Singapore, it's definitely the two hubs in the world where you can get stuff done in Web3, and it's very exciting that's happening there. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, Dubai has three things. It's intelligence, it's money, and it's ambition. And you put those three things
Hmm.
together with a government that really wants to, well, quite frankly, wean itself off of, let's say, oil petro dependence. Very strong incentives for people to do great things in that country. And the most immediate event that's going to be coming up is actually tomorrow, so it'll a little too late to announce it for the podcast going to come out in a couple of days. But Solana Consumer Day over in Bangkok, which is led by our very good friends over at Super Team Vietnam, as well as Sendcoin, which is a meme coin that brings awareness to Solana Blinks. So I think it's absolutely amazing. They're going to have 100 different builders coming together to talk less about, let's say, infrastructure and more about actual how do we attract more users, how do we create more value for users, et cetera, et cetera. So best of luck to our friends over in Bangkok who are currently there for DevCon and Solana Consumer Day. You are obviously not. Is anybody here on the call in Bangkok? I'm obviously not. Simon, I don't think you are. Are you?
I'm in Lisbon. I'm in Portugal. There was conferences here as well. So I did Europe,
I see.
but my co-founder Pierre, he's in Bangkok.
Okay, wonderful. So you have at least one person covering DevCon. I also have my
Exactly.
co-founder Richard over in Bangkok, so I got a pass this time around. Daniel, are you in Bangkok?
No, after the whole marathon we had in a couple, like after breakpoints, token, everything that happened this summer, it was time to lay low. So my girlfriend and I, we met in Bali. She really wanted to come back here, so we've got a couple of weeks in Indonesia, relaxing, working, staying at home, no parties, no nonsense, and just locking in, as I think everybody else in the space is currently at.
But definitely surfing though, right? I see a surfboard in the background.
Yeah, you got to do something in the morning. Like, yeah, it's actually for anybody working. Like, I mean, we work European hours. Working in Indonesia is actually really cool because you get to work the afternoon. So in the morning, you wake up, sunrise, go for a couple of ways, and the whole day looks different. So, yeah, it's a nice little added bonus of being here.
I
Yeah,
agree.
that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Daniel, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for teaching us more about the work that you're doing over at BorgPad for fair token launches. Simon, you got any last words?
No, thanks for joining, Daniel. And always a pleasure. Thanks for being the great co-host as you are. And thanks everyone for listening in. See you at the next one.
See ya.